Okay, are we ready? Good evening. All right, we will call this meeting to order at 5:30 p.m. We are going to do our best, as we did last time, to get everybody out here at 8 o'clock, because as I said last time, that is the witching hour for me, and I go downhill quick. So we're going to try to get what we need to get done here in the time we have. So we will start off with a staff report. We will then take some public comment and ideally leave some time for the commissioners to talk a little bit about what we've heard. So we'll jump right in with public comment. With staff report, as I point to the staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Sarah Absher. I'm the Director of the Tillamook County Department of Community Development, and with me this evening is Council Daniel Kearns. Just a brief update. The first reading of the proposed amendments took place on May 30th. There was a significant amount of public testimony received at that hearing. Following that hearing, staff went back and did some minor substantive updates to the draft that was published last Tuesday evening, allowing 7 days for public inspection. The changes, I'm happy to read through those quickly for benefit of the public and the record. Again, they were not substantive in nature. With that, Mr. Kearns would like an opportunity to visit with you about the letter received from Tonkin Torp regarding Oregon Coast hosts and their comments. We are happy to run through that quickly with you now and answer any questions, or we can wait and do that following the closing of public comment this evening. So whatever you prefer.
Commissioners, would you like to hear the response to that, or would you prefer that it come after public comment? You have thoughts?
I'd like to hear from Dan before.
Okay,
Okay,
then.
thank you.
Okay, thank you. What Sarah's referring to is a letter dated June 8th, received from a law firm in Portland. They represent the Oregon Coast hosts. They raise nine legal arguments, and when I read letters like this, I look to see if there's a legitimate legal basis for the argument being asserted. You look at the statute, you look at the ordinance that's before you, you look at the language in those, you look at the cases they cite. And with one exception, I don't find any valid legal basis for any of these arguments. And I think there's a lot of discussion in the advisory committee whether this should be a land use ordinance amendment or not. And I think that this letter and the legal arguments it articulates is a good illustration of what would happen if you were to recast this business license regulation as a land use regulation. So in this, if you have the letter before you, or even if you don't, arguments 1, 2, 5, and 6 all take the assumption that this is a land use regulation that's being adopted here. And LUBA case law defines land use regulation in the land use statute. Says any local government zoning ordinance, land division ordinance adopted under Chapter 92 or similar general ordinance establishing standards for implementing a comprehensive plan. So this doesn't do that. Comprehensive plan is not the basis for this, it's not the foundation for this, it's not implementing the comprehensive plan, it's not implementing zoning. And the cases that this letter and these lawyers refer to, though, come out of Lincoln County in the recent past, and you all are aware of them. One of these cases challenged to LUBA an initiative measure that was adopted by the voters up in Lincoln County, or down in Lincoln County. And that case was decided based on the specific language of that initiative measure. And so I take that case, I look at that language, and it said specifically that it was implementing the comprehensive plan, and it also said that the pre-existing short-term rentals that existed and would be subject to these new regulations are non-conforming uses. And that is a term of art under state land use law. And so I argued long and hard multiple times to basically LUBA, those, you can't look at that, you just ignore that language. LUBA said, no, That language matters. This ordinance expressly says it's implementing the comprehensive plan. It refers to non-conforming uses. It's a land use regulation, and it's therefore subject to all the land use regulations that apply to it, and it's invalid for that reason. It's about the same time the Board of Commissioners in Lincoln County adopted their own amendment of their business license, their STR license regulations. Didn't mention comprehensive plan, didn't mention zoning, didn't mention non-conforming uses, which is a term of art, and the same group of people, one of the same lawyers in this letter, appealed that to LUBA, and LUBA said it's not a land use regulation because it doesn't contain all of these factors, these issues. It's not a general ordinance establishing standards for implementing the comprehensive plan. I do not recommend that you introduce into this ordinance any land use notion, any basis for arguing subsequently that it's implementing the comprehensive plan, or calling any pre-existing short-term rental a non-conforming use. And people have mentioned about should you call permits or licenses. Permit is a defined term under state law, state land use law. And once you get a permit, a land use permit, it's a permanent property right. And therefore it kind of goes into that whole non-conforming use category under state law, where I urge you not to go. A license is permission to engage in an activity, usually a business activity. Under your ordinance already, you have to renew it every year. It doesn't provide a permanent property right of any sort. It's permission. The current proposal is still renewal. So you see the difference between a permit and a license. It really does matter. So, as I mentioned, argument number one assumes it's a land use regulation. It's not, and they attempt to rope in non-conforming use restrictions. That won't fly because there are no non-conforming use rights created simply by having a license. So the second argument has to do with notice that the county has to give when it amends its land use regulations to restrict uses. That's not what you're doing. This is not amending a land use regulation. Therefore, this measure, so-called Measure 56 notice requirement, does not apply. This is not a land use regulation. The fifth argument deals with land use. It says that the factual findings in the draft ordinance are not supported by substantial evidence in the record. Even if it were a legislative land use decision, no findings are required by state law. Certainly no facts are required under state law. That's a requirement that would apply if you were approving or denying a permit, a conditional use permit or something. You have to have findings, you have to have facts. So it's totally off the mark. And the other land use issue, again, refers to a requirement in the non-conforming use part of state law. Doesn't apply here. So those are four arguments. The first one that isn't in that category, the proposed ordinance improperly subjects STRs to different building code standards than the state building code, and it misstates the statute, but it only prohibits local governments from imposing different building code requirements than adopted by state law. In this whole proceeding and this whole draft, you're attaching restrictions on licenses to engage in this use. You're not regulating owners, you're not regulating renters, you're not fiddling with the building code, you're attaching operational requirements to a license, to a permissive license that allows people to engage in particular use, and you are authorized to do that. The fourth one deals with tort claim language. There's a provision in this draft that calls for an indemnification. They suggest that it's overbroad and preempted. It's section in the draft, it's section 050 sub A sub 10. I think it's on page 8 or 9. But I urge you to read that language. It requires an executed indemnification and hold harmless agreement. But the bottom line is that it only applies to claims that may accrue or as a result of or arising out of the owner's actions or inaction in operation, occupancy, use, and or maintenance of the property. So this is designed so that you aren't responsible for how they operate, how they maintain or don't maintain their building. So for example, if a outside deck were to collapse on a short-term rental, it's not your deck. You shouldn't be liable for it. And this is providing that that's a recognition of that how the house is built or maintained or not maintained or operated is not the county's responsibility, and you aren't liable for any deficiencies in that. And they suggest it's unfair. I suggest it's very fair. You don't have access to the building, you aren't maintaining it, you shouldn't be responsible if it's not maintained correctly and damage results from that. That's the point of this indemnification provision, and it's my belief that it's lawful. They suggest in argument number 7 that you improperly single out STRs for livability regulations that should apply to everyone. Well, livability requirements are already in your nuisance code, but this again are what's before you are operational requirements for the privilege of operating in this business. And so they attach to the license. If you don't comply with these requirements, you simply don't get a license or you don't maintain your license. So the next are, and that's lawful. Plus there's no legal basis that I've seen in this letter for that. They just say, geez, it's not fair. Well, it is fair, because this is a permissive, privileged license to engage in this business. Some jurisdictions prohibit STRs entirely. They require a license, and they say we will issue no licenses. We do not allow the short-term rental of dwellings. So that's a possibility, and you don't do that. The next argument, the proposed ordinance would illegally discriminate against renters and owners. Again, there's no legal basis for this. It's not illegal. And the focus of this regulation is on the license. If you don't comply with these requirements, you simply don't qualify for a license. This also doesn't regulate renters. This regulates the licensee. So, for example, if there are parking restrictions and people are parking in places where they're not supposed to be, I don't know if there's a basis for issuing a parking ticket. I kind of doubt it. But it would be a violation of the STR licensing requirements for the licensee to allow this to happen by their renters or whoever. But it's not a requirement that really applies to the car owner. It attaches to the license and the licensee. That's your focus. People come down from Seattle, if they speed, they get a speeding ticket, but they can't violate the STR regulations. Only the licensee can violate the STR regulations. That's how this works. That's how your ordinance currently works. And the final one that, and this is the one I would agree with to a certain extent, miscellaneous issues including various undefined terms, things that are unclear, confusing, conflicting, misleading, are unconstitutionally vague. In all of this ordinance writing, and you've been through this many times before, you try to be as precise as you can. 20 years from now, you're all gone, and what's left for people who have to comply with this and enforce this is the language in the ordinance. If it's not clear, it's not clear. So you do your best to make it clear and unambiguous. And if there are terms that, and they point out several terms that may warrant definition, but I would say it's not unconstitutionally vague. It could be made more precise and easier to comply with and enforce. It's not unconstitutionally vague because it provides a pretty relatively clear statement of what has to be done to comply with the ordinance. And those are all the arguments. I don't see there's any legal merit in any of them. Be as precise as you can, define terms that are operative, but it's a policy decision for you. Don't adopt a land use regulation. Or you see the kind of legal arguments that will be raised 10 minutes later.
Thank you. Commissioners, do you have any questions for Dan before we move on? And have Sarah go through our updates.
Not at this time.
I think he was pretty clear. Thank you for that, Dan.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Sarah, do you want to walk us through the changes that we've seen, and then we will begin to hear from people?
Certainly. Thank you, Commissioner Scar. So for the second reading, I'm just going to go through the changes that were made from the first reading and the ordinance that was published on June 6th for the June 13th hearing. So on page 1, I did miss a permit and changed that to license. Also added is what section 160 for the effective date. In consultation with council, it was recommended that we use the state of emergency clause for public health, welfare, and safety, and that these regulations, whatever the board chooses to adopt, go into effect immediately upon adoption. So that section has been added on the front page, and that language has been added as 160. On page 2, number 4 and number 5 of the purpose and scope. Number 4, so this is something proposing to change to regulate, and number 5 proposing to change to regulating. So in number 4, the first sentence would read, recognize the need to regulate short-term rentals. And number 5 would read, to protect the character of the county's established neighborhoods by regulating the number of rentals. Page number 3, you see a revision from the county recorder to the county clerk.
What letter are we looking at?
So page 3,
Yes.
letter,
G.
G?
There's a strike through there
Yeah.
already.
Yes,
Strike through.
yes.
Okay. Thank you.
On page 6, letter Z at the top. And to Mr. Kern's point about clarity, I would like to rework this definition, nothing substantive, but just make it a little bit more clear. The definition of a short-term rental or an STR, want to make sure that the definition language is consistent with what is also in Ordinance 74 and 75, which regulates TLT, which this is tied to in that way for defining what a short-term rental is. I did do part of it, but in looking at this, following publication of this, I would like to just amend this, just refine it just a little bit more, but nothing substantive. Page 7, section C, related to the cap, you're going to see some strike-throughs of some language with italics for new language introduced. And so that has been amended to read, the county shall establish a limit on caps. And then reading down to the next change or amendment, instead of the applicant, the county will return the application and place the applicant's name on a waiting list in order of application. After that, the county STR administrator will contact each STR applicant on the waiting list in order as soon as there is room within the applicable sub-area cap to admit a new STR application. And then reading down, the STR application fee shall not be collected if there is not room within the applicable cap to accommodate the STR. However, the applicant shall pay a $100 fee to be placed on a waiting list. So again, some refinement there. Moving forward to page 9, letter D as in David, the licensing fees. So this is where at the board's request, these fees will be carried over into a separate board order. And it states that the licensing fees, we added so it reads now, the fee for application for a short-term rental license, a license renewal, or alteration of an existing license, which is noted later in the draft that was previously published, shall be as established by board order. We will put those amounts and carry those over into a separate order per your request. Section 60, letter A, so this is regarding term of annual license renewal. So the italicized language added is that essentially what it does is instead of the renewal payment being due specifically on that anniversary date, we are giving them to the end of the month of their anniversary date. One other proposal, and again, if you turn it over to page 10, it talks about established by board order. One thing that we would like to propose to the commissioners for this section to add is the additional 30-day grace period following that anniversary month in case people get their payment notices late. This is something that the office has been doing. We would like to continue that just because with everything going by mail and notices, sometimes there is a lag. So if the board is agreeable to that later in this hearing, just to let you know, that is something we would like to add back. Section 70, burden of proof, just some rewording here with compliance with applicable requirements and removed applicable criteria in that paragraph. Page 11, at the top, so this is in relation to required parking. You will see in italics, off-site parking is subject to the requirements of ADE. I wanted to cross-reference that because that section is what talks about no more than 2 parking spaces are allowed if those spaces are off-site, so that we don't see residential properties converted into parking lots with 6 cars. I think it's really important. That language is already in this ordinance. I just wanted to cross-reference that again in this section of the ordinance. Letter B, also at the commissioner's request, I did have a conversation with Public Works Director Chris Lady. So you see in letter B in italics that language that could allow a lesser dimension for those on-street parking spaces at his discretion. So if he feels there's adequate room, we heard a lot of testimony about, being concerned about meeting the parking dimensions as they were written in the June 6th draft. This does give some opportunities for flexibility with appropriate review by Director Lady for public safety purposes. Moving on to page 13. Quiet hours, letter G. The language other is proposed to replace unreasonable. And then in italics, the owner or contact person shall respond to all noise complaints during quiet hours within 30 minutes of when the county's STR complaint dispatch center sends a message about a received complaint regarding the short-term rental. There was the following sentence about noise complaints was deleted with this new wording, which essentially cleans up the language that was previously there. With that, letter I did return to visit with building division staff, and the language requiring electrical work be performed by a state licensed of Oregon licensed electrician is proposed to be removed. The conversation with staff was that we had the conversation about minor versus major work. What could homeowners do? Concerns about fire, life safety risk, and it was concluded that work that can already be done without a permit could be done by the owner of the rental. Any work that requires a permit, we're going to go out and do the inspections anyway. And so that, the follow-up, if there are any concerns, or making sure that the work has been done properly where a permit is required, we already do that. And so it is proposed to remove that language. Moving on to page 15, number 12. The word street is proposed to be replaced with road right-of-way. Road right-of-way is defined in the definitions. This was a definition that was proposed to be added early on. There are times where the rental may not be in front of a street or accessed by a street. It may be a private easement or something else. And so the road right-of-way definition that's included in the definitions section encompasses streets, easements, access ways. Letter L, number 1, for emergency escape and rescue openings. I did have a conversation with Brian Blaylock, who is the building division supervisor. We revisited the statute, and the language that you see, the minimum grade floor openings that's been stricken within the following language, is what we are proposing. In lieu of that, it is specific to the code, And then number 2, currently adopted, was just simply, we would propose to leave it Oregon Residential Specialty Code. There's flexibility in there for the older homes, gives him an opportunity to work with the Oregon Residential Specialty Code where it's appropriate, and also to allow flexibility where it's appropriate.
And that is for units constructed prior to the adoption of this.
That is correct. So if an inspection is required, if there is something that needs to come into compliance, and that would be right now for anything, right? So we're just, basically, we're going to continue to follow down the path that we've been on, that is already in place for any type of inspection of any home, irrespective of age. Page 16, this is the pitfalls of track changes. There is a colon and a period. I will clean that up just on this first sentence on the top of the page. Page 17, section 90A. Local building inspector is amended to read county building inspector. We want to make sure it is clear that it is the county's inspector that needs to go out to perform the inspection. And also has been rewritten to, amended to read to inspect the dwelling unit and determine compliance with applicable fire and life safety code requirements. So we have cleaned that up and made that more clear. And then on page 19.
Sarah, can I take you back, please?
Yes.
To .090A inspection required.
Yes.
So there are areas where we provide inspection services for cities.
That is correct.
So this change in language from local building inspector to county building inspector, that does not make a difference? Not gonna...
No, it actually provides clarification, because there's also home inspectors and others that, you know, when you're selling a home or doing, you know, whatever. What we wanted to make sure was that it is clear that it is the county building inspector that needs to do the inspection. And even though we do hold the intergovernmental agreements with the cities to manage their building program, the ordinance and this requirement only applies to properties in unincorporated Tillamook County. So that includes the short-term rentals and the UGBs.
Even though the county building inspector will be inspecting possibly units within a city that has its own short-term rental regulations.
No, Commissioner, we will not, because they may have their own regulations in place. So the regulation, so short-term rentals, just pulling it into the county level, cities each have their own unique way, or not, of regulating short-term rentals in their cities. So this only pertains to those properties outside of city limits.
Ordinance 84.
Ordinance
I
84.
absolutely understand that, but county building inspector may go into a city to inspect a home, but just to inspect a home.
They're on contract.
They're right.
On contract, not according to ordinance 84.
Correct. That would be associated with a permit,
That's the key.
a building permit,
Okay.
mechanical, electrical. Correct.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Okay, so moving on, page 19, number 2, STR hotline. I did rework the unresolved complaint section, especially following the testimony we heard at the May 30th hearing. I think it's important that unresolved complaints that are determined to be a violation be something that is a complaint that ties back to this ordinance. Because a complaint could be anything. And there are complaints that are received that are a violation of this ordinance and the standards within it. But as you can imagine, we receive a variety of different types of complaints, and not all of them are regulated through Ordinance 84. And so the language here requires a determination that the unresolved complaint is in fact a violation. And then if it is, as determined by the administrator, that it is subject to Section 130. And then moving on to page 22 through 23. This is where you see Section 160 that includes that effective date language that then would also be captured in the board order associated with this ordinance. So in light of time, I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I know Commissioner, you are eager to get to public comment, so that is the hopefully quick overview of all of the amendments from the previous hearing.
Thank you for that. Commissioners, do you have a burning question or questions that you need to ask before we go to public testimony?
I do not.
Sorry, and I was interrupting and asking my questions as I went along, so thank you for that.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we will move to public testimony. So I do have a couple of requests for this evening. If we allow all of you to testify who have signed up with probably the only thing that will happen tonight. And I expect that some of you are ready to start to hear perhaps what we are thinking and what we are hoping for this ordinance. So I'm going to make a request that if you have testified previously, or if you have written testimony in the record, that you would not testify again tonight unless your testimony is significantly different. If it has changed, if there is something that is so crucial. Because we really would like to get to a point where we as commissioners, we do want to hear from you, and we want to begin to process this, what we've heard from you, along with what's written tonight. So if you have already testified, if you have submitted written testimony, and what you would say tonight is essentially the same, I'm going to ask you to forego testifying if that's all right with you. If you absolutely must, then please step forward. But again, in the interest of time, because we would like to have time to hear from you and to begin to process with one another as well, okay? The other piece, I know that we have someone from Oregon Coast Post tonight who is going to have a longer testimony because they have foregone other people testifying. So we will do 2 minutes per person, except for there is one person who has 3 people signed up and one person will be speaking for all 3. So just to be cognizant that that is an agreement that's been made. Otherwise, we are asking 2 minutes per person. I'm going to call you in groups of 3, and we're going to have you line up at the table, and we're going to go 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, in hopes that we can move this a little bit faster than having everybody have to move in between, okay? Sarah, am I forgetting anything?
No, Commissioner, I've got my timer ready.
You've got your timer ready? Yes.
I'd just like to mention that there are some folks standing in the back, and I know we have some empty seats, so if you have an empty seat next to you, will you please raise your hand?
Yes, thank you. Would like to sit down. And the last thing I will say is if you can try to project your voice a little when you give your testimony, we apologize, we don't have microphones in this room, but it was a bit of a challenge for people in the back last time. So as you're speaking, if you can speak with a little volume, I think the room would appreciate it. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start with Nicole Twigg, Emily Draper, and Bruce Bishop.
Madam Chair, if any of them are online, you might want to ask them to
Okay,
unmute
sorry. I had
their.
a section that said virtual. So
Okay, I was-
If
yeah.
you are online, but we didn't know you were going to be virtual, so
Nicole's online.
is she online? Nicole, would you like to, or I don't know if you're on the phone or if you are on computer, Nicole?
Thank you.
Okay, did we find Nicole?
No,
Not finding Nicole, I'm going
There's
to
a
go ahead.
hand up.
That was at the top and it wasn't Nicole, it was, unless she's up by another name. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. If we find Nicole, we will circle back. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with Emily.
Okay, thank you. I discovered Oceanside when a
Please,
camping
please give
trip.
us your name for
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
please, thank you.
Emily,
Yeah.
Emily Draper.
Thank you.
I discovered Oceanside when a camping trip to Cape Mears was thwarted by a storm. I found a little house to rent nearby and instantly fell in love with the area. I purchased my A-frame cabin with a transferable STR permit, which provided assurance that I would be able to rent out the home when not occupied by my family in order to make the dream feasible for a single mom. The 2 previous owners had done the same since the 1980s, if not before. Like most beach houses in Oceanside Village, my little A-frame has never been a full-time home for anyone. Existing lawful permit holders like myself should be able to maintain their permits and transfer rights. Permit holders should be subject to parking, zoning, and building codes per the provisions at the time that their permit was obtained. Eliminating permits through Mr. Kern's proposal would be nothing but an uphill legal battle. and a waste of valuable time, county resources, and taxpayer money. I do believe that updated regulations and caps should apply to new STRs moving forward, but there are some problems with Mr. Kern's proposal as written. Number one, the vague and confusing language around non-conforming zoning issues. Building code conformance and inspections needs to be revamped. Number two, it is illegal to require STR owners to identify the county. Number three, it is unreasonable burden for owner-managed properties to have a contact person on call 24/7 when large portions of the county do not even have cell coverage. A 30-minute in-person response is faster than our sheriff can usually achieve. An on-call response requirement should only apply to STR owners whom have had multiple complaints and violations. Finally, an update to the zoning ordinance is long overdue and would be the appropriate way to set caps. Creating buffer zones near beach access and commercial zones that could handle a higher density of STRs like
Thank you.
Oceanside Village.
Wrap that.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, we're gonna be really tight just because we do wanna hear from a lot of folks. Bruce?
Thank you, Commissioner, members of the board, staff. My name is Bruce Bishop. I'm a homeowner in Neocon. As my testimony indicates, I have testified previously. I have submitted written testimony, and I'm going to add an additional issue that I have not previously presented. I strongly support the adoption of this ordinance. It's a substantial improvement over the current regulation that the county has of short-term rentals. There's one major caveat to my support. In your statement of findings, in section 20, subsection A, 2, you state, this ordinance provides reasonable and necessary regulations for the licensing of short-term rental use of residential dwelling units, the purposes of which are to balance the legitimate livability concerns of residential neighbors with the rights of property owners to use their property as they choose. I strongly recommend that you remove that finding from your draft. Property owners do not have the right to use their property as they choose, and you should not be balancing livability concerns against those presumed rights. I don't think there is any such right. And I'm concerned that setting that up as a finding in the draft ordinance is only inviting litigation in the future. I urge you to remove that provision.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both very much. Okay, we're gonna move on. I don't know if we found
Did we
Nicole
find
Twig
Nicole?
online.
Somebody has their hand up. If you go to the
You wanna go to
top,
the top and see?
I believe it's a phone, no, it's Ms. Balzer.
Okay, so we'll keep moving. Amy Bell, Jackie Hinton, and Jim Bartels.
I submitted mine in writing, so I'll pass.
Thank you, Jackie, appreciate that. William Bush, we'll move you up.
And I don't know if Mr. Bartels is online.
Mr. Bartels online?
No, he's not.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and start. Amy, if you would, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Amy Bell. I live in Neocon. For me, it's all about livability, and I really appreciate the pause and the order that you passed. And I reread it, and it just talks about livability and community concerns and studying those and trying to fix them. So where I live, in my house, I could turn around and look at the immediate homes, and there are STR licenses for 12, 6, 20, 8, and 18. That's right around my house. Not to mention the web of streets and the other 20 that's around the corner. It's the sheer volume. It's not just a couple of bad actors, which people keep saying. It's overwhelming. I feel like I live in Motel Row. So we're just asking that you pay attention to caps, serious occupancy rates, no more transferability. But parking, if parking's off-site, our streets are going to be full right around us. So thank you for your efforts, and just appreciate if you help us bring some balance back to our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Bill Bush. My wife and I have been Nesquin residents since 2008. Since then, we've experienced all of the negative aspects of STRs multiple times. The frequency of these problems has increased in recent years. Because of that, I approve of the regulations in the revised ordinance 84. It does not contain all of the changes that I and my neighbors suggested at the beginning of this process. It is a compromise and one which we are willing to accept because it should limit what has been a steady decline in our quality of life. I want to specifically address the recommendation for caps on the number of STRs. In Nesquin, we feel vulnerable because of our proximity to Lincoln County. The STR regulations in Lincoln County are in a state of flux. However the current case turns out, it's likely that there will be some new STR restrictions. New regulations in our neighboring county will likely increase the development of STRs in our community unless we institute a cap. A similar situation currently exists within within Tillamook County, with the increase in STRs in Neocani, which in part can be attributed to the cap in Manzanita. The cap that I prefer for Nesquin is one that is close to the current number of STRs. Finally, I have frequently heard that all that is needed is better enforcement of the current regulations. Manzanita, with 263 STRs, recently hired a full-time STR code enforcement officer. The total number of STRs I found is on the order of 1,800. I wasn't able to get a breakdown for STRs in the unincorporated areas, but I imagine it's several times the number for Manzanita. So are you prepared to hire multiple, say 3 or 4 code enforcement officers and provide them with the infrastructure they need? If so, where is the money going to come from? I would suggest that a significant part of it come from increasing the STR license fee, basing it on the number of bedrooms. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, did we find Jim Bartels?
No,
Okay,
Commissioner.
Well, we have Dave Holt, Pam Zielinski, and Charles Reeder.
No. Hello?
Hello, is that Bill? Bartels?
No, this is Jim Bartles. For some reason, I keep getting muted. I don't understand why.
Oh, okay, so Jim, thank you very much for your patience with our technology. I'm going to go ahead and let Jim Bartels go first. 2 minutes.
Okay. I did submit comments yesterday because I didn't know that I would be able to participate today. So this is in addition to those comments, which I hope you will take the time to consider. I have an answer to Talking Towards letter. It's a really simple answer. Just tell Talking Toward and everybody else, okay, we will not allow STRs in unincorporated Tillamook County. That takes care of the problem. If you don't want to do that for some reason, by the way, I'm kind of surprised at that letter because, in my opinion, the proposed ordinance has been significantly softened, made more STR friendly in this process, probably because of the large number of people on the committee who have financial interest in STRs in one way or another. But my overall new suggestion is to disallow any licenses or renewal of licenses in areas of Tillamook, unincorporated areas of Tillamook County that are zoned for single-family residential or low-density residential housing. I think, and I'm serious about this, I think that would resolve many of the problems. It would protect people who have homes in unincorporated Tillamook County who suddenly found these mini motels plopped down next to them, and put the mini motels in areas that are zoned for that type of development. And as a side note, if you continue to increase STRs everywhere, then there will be no incentive to a motel developer to build a motel in Tillamook County because there's no reason for them to expect it would be successful. If you limit the areas where these STRs can be, then the motel owners can see what the competition is going to be like and can decide whether, yeah, we really need another motel in Tillamook County.
Thank you, Jim.
The other thing,
Jim,
one last thing.
Your 2 minutes. Thank you so much for your comments. Okay,
You're welcome.
thank you. And sorry about the muting problem. Dave Holt.
Good evening. I'm Dave Holt. I'm a full-time resident of Neoconi and have owned a home in the area since 2006. I'd like to thank the commissioners and the community development staff for the work you guys have been doing. I think this is a very challenging situation, and I appreciate what you're trying to accomplish. I want to just share a few thoughts on the new ordinance. My remarks are on three topics: enforcement, emergency preparedness, and transferability. With respect to enforcement and transferability or emergency preparedness, the county needs to be sure that they are collecting sufficient STR fees to fully cover the cost for adequate STR enforcement and emergency prep supplies for our STR visitors. The county will need to be sure that these STR fees include funding for proper management of both programs. Currently, enforcement is the responsibility of the county sheriff's department, of which there are 2 sheriffs to oversee the entire unincorporated Tillamook County. We shouldn't expect our understaffed sheriff's department to be the solution for STR regulations enforcement. Currently, any costs related to STR enforcement and emergency preparedness are being borne by the taxpayers at large and not by revenues that are coming directly from the STR industry. Finally, I believe that the transferability of STR licenses under the new ordinance would be unfair. Extending the future transferability of these licenses under the new ordinance creates an inequitable situation for homeowners in our county who currently do not have an STR license, and additional value that it provides in the terms of resale. Thank you.
Dave. Thank you so much. Pam.
I'm Pam Zielinski. I live in Oceanside. I cut my testimony here down drastically because of your request.
Thank you so much.
So I served on the so-called advisory committee, but I do want to state that the current revision of the proposed ordinance really doesn't represent a consensus of that committee. The committee was required to limit our discussions to a narrow scope of select questions, most of which we still didn't agree upon. The major issues were kept off the table and were not open for consideration by the committee. And the last thing I want to say is, it's really not too late to step back and do this the right way. Please take time to enforce the existing rules, which I think are adequate to accomplish the livability people are asking for, and do a study to determine the actual need for changes before dropping the axe on thousands of people in Tillamook County who have come to rely upon exactly what Mr. Kern said earlier. They've come to rely upon the fact that the permit they currently hold a permit, that it is a permanent land use right, and that's exactly what Mr. Kern said a little while ago. They currently hold permanent land use rights in the form of a permit. So please, please, please take the time to study this and only implement the necessary changes and don't drop the axe on everyone.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Reader.
Charles Reader, Oceanside, Oregon, lifetime resident. My parents bought Avalon West subdivision in Oceanside in 1973. We didn't have a bunch of money and it was a stretch for them to buy. My dad built the roads, put in the water and sewer at a great cost to my family and a benefit to the county. My folks built the Sea Haven, my current Airbnb in Oceanside. My folks ran it in the 80s as a bed and breakfast. I spent my high school years assisting with the family business. The Sea Haven and its 6,000 square feet has been here for 40 years with 0 problems. This Oceanside property was built exclusively for this purpose. I worked for the Tillamook County Sheriff's Office for 20 years, and I currently work for the Oregon State Police for the last 6 years. I don't recall having any calls for service or issues with Airbnbs. The county should be reasonable about regulations for Airbnbs. That's all I ask. There have been no studies, just opinions, and whining and complaining, mostly from people who made their living somewhere else and now want to come here and have it all themselves. In my opinion, it is vital to everyone's mental health for parents to bring their kids, dig a few clams, catch a few crabs, see a whale touch the sand with their bare feet, and see the natural beauty of this area. Heavy regulations for Airbnbs make absolutely no sense for the coastal economy. People who actually work in this area depend on tourism. Coastal communities are becoming full of people either on welfare or retirement. This is not a good growth model for Tillamook County. This place could be overrun with the homeless in the next 10 years. While we are currently considering ousting 6 positions at the sheriff's office, this is insanity. 95% of calls to service for police in the Tillamook City are homeless related. Let's focus on some real issues here, with money brought in from paying visitors. Tillamook County has no business spearheading heavy regulations of Airbnbs while the rest of the world progresses with them. Constant new rules, higher taxes, fees around every corner. I would like to be able to run my nightly rentals and retire here, but I'm concerned about constant regulation changes. These changes are causing a devaluation of my property. Who's going to pay for these losses?
Last hearing, which is please avoid public outcries like that. We're trying to get through in our time, and we would appreciate the decorum that we had in our last meeting, which was excellent. So, all right, the next folks we have up, Heather Braun, Stephen Stewart, and Joni Bloom.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, Nicole Twig has joined us.
Okay, Nicole will catch you in the next group. Heather?
Okay, yes.
And Heather, you have 6 minutes
the
because we have
yes.
other folks who have deferred their time, so we will ask you to stick to that.
Thank you. Chair Scar, Vice Chair Bell, and Commissioner Yamamoto. My name is Heather Brand. My law firm is Heather A. Brand, PC, and I have a niche practice representing short-term rental owners in Oregon. I represented the Lincoln County group last year in their successful LUBA appeal to overturn the short-term rental ban. My co-counsel, Tom Cantor, advised the Clatsop County owner group, who just successfully defeated a ballot referendum to remove short-term rentals there. Today, I am here representing Oregon Coast hosts and urge you to reconsider adopting changes to Ordinance 84. I realize you all have been carefully developing the record, starting with the inception of the Short-Term Rental Advisory Committee in 2018 to study the program and potential program changes. And I am certain, as careful lawmakers, you will continue to accept public comment and consider these important issues right up to the time that you make a decision. Tonkin Torp and my firm have put together a letter we believe gives you an overview of the unlawful aspects of the ordinance changes that are under consideration. Now, Mr. Kearns went through them briefly already, but I'll go through them briefly as well, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions for me. First, the proposed ordinance would violate property rights protected under state law, my favorite, ORS 215-130 sub 5, by eliminating permits and restricting future transfers of permits. And that includes the violation of the vested rights group, which are those people who are unfairly caught in the moratorium while building. Second, because the county is changing a land use status quo, it has to provide proper notice to all affected property owners in the county, which it has not done under Measure 56. I understand in the most recent draft, the county may have removed some of the requirements for upgrading building code changes to current standards. If that comes back in, our position is that is unlawful as a matter of state building code. Fourth, the indemnification language is overbroad and it's preempted by the Oregon Tort Claims Act. Oregon state law has a scheme to cover county liabilities, and counties just don't have the power to alter that scheme. Fifth, the factual findings in the ordinance are not supported by substantial evidence on the record. Sixth, the proposal to adopt community-specific restrictions at a later time by board order and not by ordinance are unlawful. Seventh, the proposed ordinance improperly singles out short-term rentals for the community livability issues that should apply to all conduct by everyone who live, work, and visit Tillamook County. 8, the proposed ordinance would illegally discriminate against renters and owners of short-term rentals. 9, and finally, we've given you a catch-all of issues. They may seem nitpicky, but they actually present an important problem of being unconstitutionally vague, as well as unconstitutionally imposing a punishment on one person for conduct and violations of another person. The board has an opportunity to avoid waste of time and money that we have seen in Lincoln County. We urge you to take the chance, read our written testimony, and work with council to address our concerns. Are there questions for me from the board?
Commissioners, I would suggest we continue with public testimony and not
This is public
engage
testimony.
in a dialogue.
I'll go ahead
Not
and use
engage in a
the balance
dialogue.
of my 2 minutes on a couple points to address what Mr. Kearns started out with. One is that I heard almost the identical speech from Mr. Kearns when he was defending the ballot measure to Lincoln County. And we had the same agreement then. The last time LUBA ruled on this, they agreed with me and my clients and ruled against Mr. Kearns and his clients. And there's an important piece of the land use component that I don't think has been adequately expressed. In the law, sometimes we say once begun, then undone. And Mr. Kearns told you, permits are land use, licenses are not land use. So the fact that everyone has a permit is what makes this land use. If we look at your comprehensive plan, it already contemplates short-term rental use, seasonal use by visitors as part of a housing need that has to be accommodated by Tillamook County. When we look at the zoning code, and we had this fight in Lincoln County, the question is, what does silence mean? And with the ballot measure, they argued, oh, they've always been illegal. Well, the problem is, some places like Portland, it has always been illegal, and it's because when you look up residential, it says owner use or renter use of 30 days or more. And any rentals of less than 30 nights are considered a transient lodging. So it's very clear in the zoning codes where the default is this activity is illegal. By contrast, in both Lincoln and Tillamook County, when you read the zoning code as a whole, along with the comprehensive plan, this use has always been contemplated, and that is consistent with our status as a premier, wonderful recreational location. And this is an activity that gives families, not just those with their own $1 million home that they can let sit empty, but it gives other families who maybe can't afford that amazing $1 million home the opportunity to come with their families and stay as a seasonal visitor. That seasonal visitation is contemplated in your plan, and this use is allowed under your zoning code. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on. Stephen Stewart was next. Is Stephen online? Okay, while we look for that, Joni Bloom.
Okay, I'm Joni Bloom, and I want to thank Ms. Absher and the commissioners for all the hours and energy you've expended on this endeavor on behalf of all of us here in the county. I've read and reread the personal notes to you folks over the past few months, and I did not find my original letter from February, so I forward a copy of it to Lynn yesterday. Many important issues were addressed by people about the rentals in Nescoin, and today I want to address what I believe is the Roman numeral #1 of these issues, and that is density. Overflowing garbage, excess noise, autos clogging the streets and lawns, all symptoms of an overflow of rentals in general, not just of unruly renters. The density issue, I think, is the top priority here, and for a village of 300 residents, it is overwhelming to allow more than 12% of these houses and cabins to be offered as short-term rentals. To landlords, both personal and corporate, of short-term rentals there, I ask them to imagine 20% of your own neighborhood blocks being filled with revolving transients with no regard to your own residency. Please consider regulating the percentage of these rental homes in proper proportion to the few of us who live here, and I've lived there 43 years. Contrary to something that was not written here in the many letters back in February, there was a person who said Nescoin is first and foremost a resort community. It is not. It is a residential village where people move here to live and to work and to worship and to volunteer and to send their kids to school. We are desperate to keep it this way, in much the same way you landlords endeavor to keep your own neighborhoods intact, safe and friendly. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Madam Chair, Nicole Twigg, and there is a Stewart but I don't know if that is the steward that is signed up to speak.
Okay, perfect. So Nicole, and I have Stephen Stewart. If that is you online, please, you will be next, and then Terry Maragos. So, Nicole.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
We can.
You can. Okay, thank you, and I'm so sorry I was having issues. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'm Nicole Twig of Quanda Coastal Properties Vacation Rental Management. I have a couple of very specific requests for ordinance changes that I do not believe were completely vetted by the committee, and I do not believe would affect any livability or public safety. They're just kind of gonna make everything a lot harder. So please do not require an expiration date on the exterior signage. The expiration date is not helpful for contact info. It is not helpful for emergencies or safety concerns. It is an unnecessary, undue, wasteful burden of expense. Most of the violations have been regarding signage, so I feel like it's just kind of stuck in there to be able to mess up. And I think it will result in cheap and lesser quality signs due to a yearly replacement. The signs I purchased for the homes are about $45, $50 a piece. So to replace those yearly would be I just don't see why we've never had an expiration date even posted on the interior requirements before. So to have it on the outside is just not needed, I don't think. And also I encourage you to please readjust the newest edit to the noise section. As it reads now, I feel like that if a guest arrives after 10 p.m. and slams a car door or has a crying baby, they would be in violation if someone could hear them next door. So some sort of use of the word sustained or anything would be helpful there. I wanted to talk about that the permitting expenses have more than tripled in the past 2 years, and several of the new requirements would make operating more expensive and complicated, and this isn't bad in theory. I mean, more money to the county is great, but in practice, it just professionalizes the STRs and thus increases visitors. There's 25% of the currently permitted homes that rent less than 30 days a year. So this would kind of, more fees, more rules, more regulations pushes those people out of the market because they're not really in it for the money anyway. They just want to be doing things right. If there's caps, then it's just going to professionalize the neighborhood, increase visitors. Somebody's going to replace those homes with a home that has to be professional and make more money.
Thank you,
Our
Nicole.
committee continuously agreed
Nicole,
that small
yeah.
family operators.
That's your 2 minutes. Thank you so much,
Oh.
Nicole.
It was faster in practice. Sorry. Thank you.
It always is. Okay, thank you so much. Stephen Stewart. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and pass that one. We'll go on to Terry Maragos.
My name is Terry Maragos. My husband and I built our home in Neocani in 2004. The area had narrow roads and minimal noise. We knew our neighbors. The community had a real livability and a sense of safety. Now the coyotes are at our doors. There really is a den of them on Neocani Beach. Neocani was platted in 1910. From the beginning, Neocani was established as a non-commercial community. What we're seeing now is house flipping, and that has brought problems. A community totally zoned residential has been taken over 22% by STRs. STRs were historically operated by families. Now houses are being bought as business enterprises. Meadow Davis, an outstanding North Coast realtor, cites the necessity of balancing the needs of investors with current neighborhoods. Regulating STRs in residential zones is a good idea. Dave Boone, a commissioner from the Neocani Water District, cites water department facts. STRs use more water, especially in the summer months when our source springs run low and it's fire season. This resource is finite. So are our narrow, deteriorating roads. From 2018 until now, the number of STRs in Neocani has increased by 50%. There must be reasonable caps. Limiting license transfers will enable new owners to receive a license. Let's move Tillamook County forward and adopt the new draft ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Elaine Klein, Terry DeSaro, and John Steele. I'm assuming neither of you are Elaine.
Yes,
Okay, we'll hold on her and see if she find her online. Terry DeSaro.
I'm speaking for Terry DeSaro, that's my spouse.
Oh, thank you. If you could identify
Yes,
yourself
I'm
for the record.
Craig Nern, and we live in Neocani. And I'd like to speak in general terms about the rationale for good regulation. I do support the amendment. I'd like to point out that what we're dealing with the STR controversy is at its heart a financial phenomenon. In our country, when a new way to make money is created, it always seems to expand to the point where something breaks. We saw that with the dot-com bubble. We saw it with the securitized lending real estate bubble in 2007 and 8. We saw it in cryptocurrency, the meme stock fad from 2 years ago, and even that excess was part of what happened in the recent banking crisis that started in Silicon Valley. And every one of these manias, the proponents always say, this is different, leave us be. With the STR boom, the thing that could break isn't the financial model, which admittedly is sound, it's our communities and neighborhoods. And when things break, then people look to the government for relief. It's far better for our county government to get ahead of the problem and enact sensible regulations to protect our neighborhoods. The regulation of economic interests is difficult, it's complex, but it's absolutely necessary. And I would like to make just a specific comment or two about our neighborhood, Neocani. Our proximity to Manzanita, which has a sensible cap on the number of STRs, has likely created the overflow into our neighborhood. The demand is there, and the supply has moved north into Neocani. We now have 25% more, on a percentage basis, more STRs than Manzanita. We need a process that over time, even if it takes years, would cap our number of STRs at a level consistent with Manzanita's 17.5%. That means attrition, and that can be accomplished fairly, if only slowly.
Thank you. John Steele.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm John Steele. My wife and I have been residents of Neocani for 28 years. For various periods, I've been a board member of Neocani Water District, North County Recreation District, Reinhardt Clinic, and I'm currently on the board of the Nehalem Fire Department. As you know, these districts and organizations and many more are literally the lifeblood of our communities. An important fact is that they all depend on the support of volunteer community members for carrying out the dozens of tasks required to keep them thriving and for providing committed and guidance and leadership. This is especially critical in our small communities that can't afford large numbers of paid staff. Non-resident STR owners and their customers provide some funding for services through taxes and STR fees, but they do nothing to promote and develop our volunteer base. However, the large number of people living in the STRs do create a greatly increased demand for these services, a demand that is difficult to fill without volunteers. One prime example is that firefighters respond to every medical call in the area, as well as fires, accidents, and other emergencies. Visitors expect and receive these services, but they provide none of the volunteer personnel who actually provide them. As residents of Tillamook County, we have no right or desire to ban visitors from our area. After all, many of us were once visitors ourselves. However, in establishing residences here, we accept a responsibility to maintain and make our communities better. Absentee STR owners and their customers have no such obligation. To maintain livability standards wanted and needed by residents and visitors alike, a reasonable limit of STRs must be established. I recommend that the limit should be no more than 20% of residential dwellings in unincorporated Tillamook County.
Thank you. Okay, Maggie Wilson, Elizabeth Vitale, and Andrew Hadid.
Hi, I'm Liz. I'm online, just so you know.
Okay, thank you, Liz.
I'm Maggie Wilson. I'm a grateful resident of Neocon, and I feel like our neighborhood has really explained our situation very well tonight, and I'm not certain that I have a lot more to share. In the short time that I've been a resident, 2 adjacent properties have gone to STRs. I do understand that we depend, the North Coast economy depends on our guests that we have, our visitors that come, and I appreciate them for the most part. I do also appreciate that you are looking at capping these incoming STRs, and I appreciate those folks that have their homes that they are renting right now, and they need to be protected as well. Off-street parking, I feel, is a vital thing to look at in our particular neighborhood with our narrow roads and getting safety equipment up into some of our neighborhoods. Into my neighborhood, it can sometimes be very difficult. People come to the beach to enjoy the beach, so they park their car and they go to the beach. And we've had situations where we needed to get those vehicles moved. So there's some real safety issues, and I would appreciate the idea of having a reasonable cap on our STRs in our neighborhood.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Elizabeth Vitale, Liz.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can, go ahead.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name is Liz Vitale. I'm a resident of Mescaline. I own a busy clinic in Pacific City in the Bayshore Medical Building. I'm an acupuncturist with a full practice serving our local community. And my husband and I have a young daughter who will go to school here. We both volunteer as EMTs with Mist of the Fire. We're one of the fortunate few families who have been able to secure a stable long-term rental, and we hope to one day own a home in this community. Commissioners, I voted for each of you, and I want to thank you for the work you are doing, and thank you, Sarah Absher, for all of your work as well. As you make a decision on how our county will move forward, please keep in mind that many of the testimonies against STR growth regulation are coming from people who are not your constituents. They did not vote you into your current role as commissioner. The testimonies against STR regulation are coming from folks who are STR owners, real estate agents, vacation rental management companies, people who see personal financial gain as unregulated growth. But unregulated growth comes at a great expense to many of your constituents in the form of decreased access to and availability of healthcare and inflated housing and land costs, to name a few. The health of our entire community suffers when there is no housing available for doctors, nurses, teachers, firefighters, and sheriffs. We need growth regulation in order for our community to be livable, literally, to house people who keep our community alive, also literally. Lastly, I want you to know that our local community has been antagonized by STR owners who are afraid of not being able to further their personal financial gain. Some have left negative reviews for small local businesses, such as mine, on Google, even though they have never used our services. They have sent out misleading and incomplete surveys trying to make it seem there is no problem. Some have been abusive to our beloved community members who dedicate countless hours volunteering on the Mescaline liaison. Okay,
That was your 2 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Andrew.
Hi, I'm Andrew Hadid. I'm a Neocon resident. I'd just like to say, with the advent of the sharing economy, STRs have become a much larger phenomenon everywhere. To me, the activity has slowly circumvented the intent of zoning law, in addition to reducing the affordability of housing. Unfortunately, visitors will always be less considerate than permanent residents. That's why I agree with the county that limits and regulations to this activity are necessary. I'd also support a stronger cap on short-term rentals and restrictions on transferring licenses. What we're talking about are limits to what is commercial activity in a residential zone. The proposed changes to Ordinance 84 should be approved without hesitation to preserve the rights of full-time residents that call these areas home. I'd like to thank all the county employees and others that have put in so much work on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Helena Bariki, Jeffrey Weitzel, and Diane Bloom.
Hi, my name is Helena Barecki. I'm a full-time resident of Neskowin. I spoke a couple of months ago. These are substantively different comments. I really appreciate all your work on the new Ordinance 84 and generally support its direction. I have one request. Create an exemption from minimum parking space requirements if the STR makes it clear to their guests their limited parking, that street parking is prohibited, and that it encourages guests to arrive via carpool, bicycle, or public transit. This will improve air quality, decrease wear and tear on roads, and could potentially free space for an ADU on the property. I agree with the people who have spoken about the need for volunteers in the community. I'm a volunteer in the community, and also on the impact of build-out of STRs on affordability. And also want to talk about water. In a town hall, Neskowin Water District Manager Troy Trout told us there shouldn't be a problem with water for us if the rise in population stays as expected, 25% over the next 20 years. He said the highest demand for water they've had was 240 gallons per minute on the July 4th, 5th holiday, and they can filter and deliver up to 380. Here's the problem. Resident-occupied homes in Neskowin average 2 to 4 people. Legacy STRs tend to be small. But the new STRs in my neighborhood fit the estate home capacity of 14 adults plus 3 children. They're full on summer weekends. If STR percentages increase as Neskowin grows, summer vacation spikes could totally overwhelm our water district's capacity. Could be even dicier since our Oregon coast summers are getting hotter, longer, and drier, and even if we do everything right to mitigate climate change, the science is clear it'll take about 30 years to stop that trend. I know the fire chief is worried about the potential for fire and need for water too. For these reasons, I urge caps on STRs at or near current percentages. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jeff Weitzel, and I live in the South Beach neighborhood of Neskowin. When I look out my kitchen window, my nearest neighbor is a 3-story, 7-bedroom, 7-bathroom brick that rents for almost $6,000 a weekend and often has 7 cars parked out front. There is another giant purpose-built STR across the street. South Beach is lousy with these quote-unquote houses that were never intended as places for people to live. The lots on which these miniature hotels have been indefinitely lost to Tillamook County's housing stock. Of course, many STRs are lovely houses owned by lovely people. We've heard from some of them today. But good, bad, and ugly, I believe we are still coming to terms with how STRs affect us here in Tillamook County. For example, when would-be STR operators bid up the prices on premium lots and then remove them from the housing inventory, how far do those ripples propagate in the housing market? Do STRs make housing more expensive elsewhere in the county, perhaps worsening the homeless problem that an earlier speaker referenced? I don't think we know. Or what about water, as Ms. Barecki referenced? Will a day come when we can't build needed housing because too many STRs are sucking our watersheds dry on the coast? This new Ordinance 84 has some good tools the county can use to manage STRs in our communities. Permit caps not only give the county a knob it can turn up and down as needed, they also can be used to make STRs less attractive as pure business ventures by introducing uncertainty about if and when property can be rented as an STR. Parking requirements also serve a second purpose as a curb on McMansion STRs, since only so many bedroom parking space pairs will fit in a typical R1 zoned lot, and there's only so much extra parking floating around. Commissioners, Ms. Absher, protect our communities as places for people to live. Ordinance 84 is only one tool in your toolbox. Don't stop there.
Thank you.
I'm Diane Bloom. I'm a full-time resident in Neocani. I've lived there for over 12 years. I was a member of the Hallam Bay Health Center Pharmacy. health clinic and pharmacy, and am unit administrator for the Nehalem Bay Medical Reserve Corps for the past 12 years. Now, these volunteers come from full-time and part-time residents, not from short-term renters. We provide for the emergency needs for our whole community. In the event of a disaster, we are buying supplies and preparing for all these people that are going to come up from the beach. I mean, it could be a couple hundred. We are like 30 people in our little development. How can we ever meet all those needs? What do these people, what can we do? And if we don't save that housing in our community for the people that are going to volunteer to provide the medical care for these people that are going to be injured, we're at a loss. Right now, our volunteers are all coming from full-time and part-time volunteers. We need these people. We need these people to keep all of us safe. It's people like me who are writing the grants. It's not the volunteers that are short-term renters. It's all the, and you know what? We don't have enough people to help us do this work. And I'm afraid as our community is becoming more and more short-term renters, we are not going to have the resources to continue providing for the medical needs of our community in a disaster. And I'm talking slides. The Neocani Mountain could slide. We don't even have to have a major thing. A windstorm, an ice storm, a snowstorm could cut us off. These people need medical care, but we don't have volunteers because they can't find housing. And this pertains to our firemen and our firefighters, our policemen. The situation is just desperate. Please just try to limit the use of short-term rentals where people could be using them for, long-term rentals. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, John Bloom, Dave Bennett, and Thomas Mock. And I think Thomas Mock is registered to be online.
John Bloom submitted his for the...
Perfect, thank you very much, appreciate that.
Dave Bennett has nothing new to say.
Thank you, Dave, I appreciate that. Thomas Mock. The next three up are, these are now, the rest of, or not the rest of these, but the next section of mine are virtual.
Okay.
Thomas Mock, Barbara Rippey, and Vicki Brahodich.
So we have.
You see Vicki?
Yep. We start with Vicki.
I'm here, Vicki.
Great, Vicki, why don't you lead us off?
Thank you. I'm Vicki Brahodich, a resident of Neskowin. First of all, I support the most recent draft of the amended STR ordinance and commend all those who worked so diligently on it. There are ideas, for example, density limits that I wish were in it, but the current draft greatly advances the two goals of balancing residents' livability while at the same time supporting the continued existence of those STRs currently permitted. Although I support the type of traditional historic family rentals that have always been in Neskowin, the transitory nature of short-term rentals with absentee owners means that their occupants are literally here today and gone tomorrow without the need to engage in the sorts of activities that strengthen our community. At the risk of repetition, I'm echoing those who have just spoken recently about the value of volunteers. It's our resident neighbors who join together through hard work, talent, dedication, to build and support an infrastructure that maintains our livability. Just as an example, Neskowin residents, many of whom are retirees, are currently volunteering to build emergency supply sheds for their respective neighborhoods. Others volunteer for community emergency training and disaster medical operations, basic first aid, CPR, life search and rescue, supporting the Nestucca Fire District, including as volunteer firefighters, in the sewer and water district, road associations, schools, and countless other ways. TLT money can't buy all these vital services that are provided by volunteer residents. Our goal should be to ensure that Neskowin and the other unincorporated communities of Tillamook County remain true communities of locals committed to the improvement of our livability, rather than allow it to be overrun by absentee owners whose clientele has no long-term vested interest in this truly special place. Thank you.
Thank you. Barbara Rippey. Barbara Rippey. Thomas Mock. Lloyd Lindley. I see Lloyd, I can see that you're there.
I'm here.
Yeah, please go ahead, 2 minutes.
Lloyd Lindley, Neoconi, Nehalem, Oregon 97131. Madam Chair and Commissioners, Director Absher, thank you very much for all of your work. I'm speaking in favor of revised STR Ordinance 84. STRs have become investment properties, unlike single-family occupancy or B&Bs. They are in general owned, advertised, and operated as commercial overnight accommodations. This ordinance provides the foundation for licensing and preserving the livability of our coastal communities. That said, it is incumbent upon the county to uphold the intent of residential neighborhoods and communities to preserve their livability and sustainability. I'm asking that the Commission adopt the following 4 points in addition to the ordinance. 1, adopt one-time, no greater than 1% cap with no increases or annual increases contingent upon the outcome of the community by community public STR planning process. 2, allow only one-time license transfer for existing STRs. For future applicants, use licensing policies and procedures instead of permitting. 3, from adoption of revised Ordinance 84, issue 1 STR license per owner per property in a community or neighborhood until such time that the community by community public STR planning process is completed. 4, prepare an evaluation of infrastructure capacity in accordance with STR occupancies for fire, life, safety, and infrastructure resources. I encourage you to incorporate these 4 points and vote yes in support of Tillamook County Revised STR Ordinance 84. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you. Chris Strand, are you with us online?
Yes, I am.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. My family and I have been residents of Neoconi for 38 years, and I'm going to read to you my comments once I get them back online. All right, right here. I'm impressed, really, and appreciate the committee for all the work that you've done. Those of us in Neoconi are in a minority, and I'm curious about unincorporated Neoconi in particular, because we have a spring-fed residential water supply, and that supports our fire and safety. What I mean is our fire hydrants. When we are neighbors to Manzanita, who has a 17.5 cap, and Manzanita's is going to be increased. I need to mention that they have public parking, public bathrooms, public park, pickleball, shops, art galleries, wine, restaurants, bars, and grocery stores. Neoconi has none of those amenities or infrastructure to support that. There's no public transportation, there's no taxi cabs, there's no Ubers, which might help with some of the parking issues. There's one access road to Neoconi for fire rescue and Tillamook police. Our spring-fed water system fluctuates with the seasons and the weather. One short-term rental with 10 visitors taking 1 shower per day, let alone laundry, dishes, and cooking, uses approximately 5 to 6 single-family homes worth of water. Multiply that by 10, 20, or 30. I think if we increase the cap, we decrease the water for the people who live here, showers, drinking, cooking, but mostly fire safety. Manzanita police do not come to Neoconi.
That was your 2 minutes. Thank you, Chris.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, Meadow Davis.
Yes, I'm here.
Go ahead, Meadow, 2 minutes, please.
Sure. Thank you for taking my comments, and thanks to all of you for your hard work. My name is Meadow Davis. I'm a resident of the county in the UGB at Manzanita. I'm a real estate broker and business owner in Manzanita, Neocony, and Nehalem areas, which includes significant areas of unincorporated county under the proposed amendments, Ordinance 84. As the top producing broker in these areas for many years now, my clients' property values are my primary concern. In my experience, my clients' property values have been best protected by reasonable, clear regulations of STRs in residentially zoned areas. Manzanita has had clear, reasonable regulations in place for years. The regulations allow for second home owners to rent their properties, to offset their costs, and even make some income. Licenses being relinquished at point of sale maintains like-for-like values of properties. They provide a balanced community, neighborly atmosphere for everyone. This atmosphere brings people to our coastal communities, also creates value for property owners. While I would have preferred to see the county adopt the same proven system, which I have seen working well in Manzanita for many years, especially the one license per owner rule, I support the current proposed draft for amendments to Ordinance 84. Thank you.
Thank you. So commissioners, I want to take a pause for just a second. We are probably halfway through the number of people we have currently signed up for public comment. This is currently our final scheduled hearing. My question to you is, are we wanting to begin to digest and talk with staff and among ourselves about what we've heard? Are we wanting to continue and complete public comment with the possibility that we would schedule another hearing? I know that is something that we have thought of. So I want to take just a pause and get each of you to share with me your thoughts.
Is it your plan to go till 8 o'clock?
It is my plan to go till 8 o'clock. It is now 7 o'clock.
I might listen to another 15 minutes of testimony, but it depends on how much we need to, what kind of conversations we need to have.
So I think the challenge in front of us today is we have on the paper the ordinance that as it was recommended to us from the committee with a few small tweaks from staff. There are things that have mentioned that are not currently part of the ordinance, which we need to determine if any of those are things that we wish to entertain. So I think there is conversation for us to have. Again, I know I don't want to cut off public comment. I know we want to hear from everyone. So just for those of you who have not yet commented, and I realize there's about, some of you are online, some of you are in the room. So let me take a pulse in the room. How many of you are here saying, yes, we like Ordinance 84 as it's written, we support this, and the things that have been said already represent our viewpoints? Okay. How many of you in the room? And I'm
sorry, could you clarify? You said the Ordinance 84, do you mean the existing ordinance?
As the amendments as written, okay. You're here in support of that, and you feel that someone who has spoken already has made the point that you would like to make. Okay. And for those in the room who have very strong concerns about Ordinance 84, that we're here hoping to speak, thank you. How many of you would say that someone else has already made the key points that you were going to make? That what you want to do is say, yes, I agree, as opposed to I have something. Does anybody have something brand new?
Commissioner, can you hear me?
I can, and I'm going to ask online in just a second, Annie. So in the room, I see 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, too many people that have something brand new. So commissioners, I think the question is, are we wanting, because we've spent an entire hour, which is what it will likely take to get through the number of people who still have comments.
So knowing that and thinking that we may extend this and take more public comment in the future, I think we do need the time to really have a discussion here.
So 15 minutes more public comment, that gives us 40 minutes of chewing on it, which will give people the opportunity then to have public comment in a future hearing regarding what you hear us talk about. Right now you're all focusing, and which is fabulous, on what's on paper, but we would love to have some time because we only get to talk when we're all together with you. or if we have an executive session related to litigation. We'd really like to talk where you all get a chance to hear what our thinking is. That's part of my concern to get to that.
I agree with that. I do want to hear the comments of people who came here to share your thoughts with us. And if we don't have a chance to deliberate, we won't be able to direct, if we want to further change the ordinance, we won't be able to direct staff to do that if we don't have a chance to talk about it. And you may find it interesting to hear us talk about our thoughts about this, hopefully.
I would agree. So let's take 10 more minutes. That will give us 45 minutes to chew on it. Sound good? 10 more minutes of public comment. Thank you to those online for your patience. Most of the people currently are in the online and going through my list. Donnig Madonna, Pam Green, and Daryl Carter. And I will ask again, if all you want to say is yay, somebody already said it, please let us know that and then pass so we can keep moving.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can, Donnig.
Great. Hello, I'm Donnig McDonough. I'm a property owner and taxpayer for 12 years in the Quanah Shores community of Pacific City, as well as a multi-year volunteer. I'd like to communicate 4 core points, each supported by findings from a recent survey of Quanah Shores property owners conducted by the Quanah Shores Homeowners Association. For background, there are 178 properties in Quanah Shores. An estimated 47% of Quanah Shores homeowners currently are STR permit holders. 53% are not. The survey findings reveal that super majorities of Quanah Shores property owners hold similar opinions on the key STR-related issues, despite a great diversity of circumstances among these owners. Point 1, the ability to offer their home as an STR is a central component of Quanah Shores home ownership. 77% of property owners indicated that, quote, when you bought or built your home, the ability to rent it in the future was a factor in your decision. 88.9% of Quanah Shore property owners believe, quote, it is important to have the right to offer your home as an STR either now or in the future. Point 2, livability concerns associated with STRs exist and can be reduced and mitigated with effective enforcement. In fact, more than 3/4 of respondents indicated that their preferred approach for the county is to, quote, better enforce STR rules for livability now and wait to see if a cap on the number of permits is needed. Number 3, permit caps should not be imposed on Quanah Shores. 70% of respondents hold the position that there should be no cap on the number of STR permits allowed for Quanah Shore owners each year. And number 4, STR permit caps, including the current moratorium, are damaging to the ability of Quanah Shore homeowners to maintain their properties. 72.7% of respondents believe that STRs, quote, make living in Pacific City more affordable or possible. And when asked what impact on them and their family would occur if prevented from offering their home as an STR for 1 or more years, 71.4% of respondents stated that they would have a negative impact on their family.
Thank you. Okay, Pam Green.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm a resident of Neocani. I've been a landowner here for over 20 years. Thank you, Commissioners, Director Absher, Mr. Kearns, and all for your hard work. I'm in support of the revisions and provisions in Ordinance 84 regulating the STR businesses in our residential and rural communities. I applaud Director Absher's commitment to meet with each of Tillamook's communities to determine each one's future STR capacity because they are different for each community. The implementation of occupancy limits, noise and parking regs, percentage caps, transfer limitations are necessary and have been successfully enacted in cities and counties across America. Why? Because those places understood the need to mitigate livability impacts. Many of those restrictions are stricter than what is proposed here. This boom in STR businesses is not unique to Tillamook County. It's a modern day gold rush. It's just human nature to want to maximize. It's the tragedy of the commons. A good analogy is the fishing industry. Everyone wants to haul in unlimited fish with their boat. Salespeople want to sell more boats. Processors want more fish. Yet without the wisdom of regulation, a healthy fishery collapses. Balance is needed. unrestricted STR industry depletes the fabric of the community, and we feel the impacts. You've heard a lot from people who benefit most from the industry. They have had more committee seats at the table, and they revised provisions to suit their interests. My ask is that you lower the occupancy to no more than 2 persons per bedroom and 3 additional people of any age in the house, and reduce that parking by at least 1 space per house. Currently, 9 people in a 2-bedroom home every night of the year is just too many. Thank you for governing with wisdom and for keeping the balance of a healthy community in mind.
Thank you. Okay, Darrell Carter.
Hi, I'm Darrell Carter. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I live at 38600 Reed Road in Neoconi. I've lived here for 39 years, and I was on the original short-term rental committee at Tillamook County. And I have been watching for all those years what has happened to our community as a result of the degradation brought by short-term rentals to the community, period. I want to thank everyone in Tillamook County that's been working on the new ordinance. It's very much needed, and I'm generally in support of the entire ordinance. I have several issues that I think should not be watered down or weakened. Number one, there needs to be a cap on the rentals allowed in the community. We have 84 rentals in Neoconi. That's the equivalent of a 250-room hotel cranking up on the weekend here in Neoconi. We don't have a water supply to support that type of activity. Last year was the first time in 30 years that I've seen signs put out by our water district saying to shut down on outdoor watering, and there's not enough water available. So there needs to be some significant ways to attain the cap that we need. Secondly, licenses should not be transferable to new owners. This just perpetuates the problem. We need to have some way of reducing the number of rentals in our community over time. Third, the occupancy cap. One house down on the beach that I drive by every day will sleep 20 people. They rent it for over $2,000 a night. Another one sleeps 14 people. I was told that last year in August they took in $43,000. Number 4, single ownership. 1 house per owner, not multiple. One person here has 5 houses, purely a business. To sum it up, these houses are, as we all know, businesses, motels, operating in single-family zone residential communities. Okay.
Perfect, thank you.
Anyway, thank you very much for work on it, and I hope you get it passed.
Thank you. Okay, we'll take 2 more. Elizabeth Arch. Elizabeth, is that you? Okay, not hearing Elizabeth. How about Candace Miller?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, please go ahead,
Good
2
evening.
minutes.
Good evening, I'm Candace Miller. My husband Gregory and I are full-time residents and registered voters living in Nescoin. We feel it is imperative that the county support any amendments that include growth management of STRs and improve the livability in our communities through updated regulations. The county must include proposals that set a 20% cap on licenses, continue to hold or stop issuing new licenses to stay within a 20% cap. Nescoin is already overloaded with too many STRs. Even a 1% increase will put added stress on county resources that can't effectively enforce current regulations, let alone new ones. Prohibit transfers of licenses on property sale transactions. Prevent boutique hotels and corporate ownership by imposing a limit of 1 license per person, group, or entity. A plan to introduce density cap limits of no more than 35% of STRs at any given street. In addition to a telephone hotline to register complaints, the county should implement an online complaint form. This would allow the county to record, track, and follow up on any and all complaints. The City of Newport has an excellent form on their website. And finally, commissioners, do not be influenced by surveys and PR rhetoric that present inaccurate data and misleading information from sources and businesses that rely and benefit from STR income. I hope you will support and address the concerns of the people who live in Tillamook County. We, as well as you, have the duty to preserve and protect our communities from overdevelopment of STRs and pass regulations to maintain clean, safe, and quiet neighborhoods. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Candace. Okay, we will go ahead for tonight and stop public comment there. I think we have a lot to chew on, commissioners. I'm going to ask that as we begin this conversation, just for the interest of trying to give ourselves some structure, that we start with what is in the written ordinance and ask any questions or bring up any concerns that we have in related to what's in the written ordinance, as opposed to things that are not in the ordinance that may be of interest or concern. Does that seem like reasonable, just to keep us focused, to start with what's here, and is there anything here that we have questions or concerns about as it is written? And then we'll open it to either of you who may want to begin with a question for Sarah, or just something in here that you think should be different perhaps than as it has been written and amended between the meetings.
So I will start, and I just
Please
want to
do.
give a brief overview of the changes that I have continually seen to this ordinance 84. And I think we're making real progress. And I want to hand it to the committee that's been working on this, as well as community development, who has done a terrific job in shepherding this. Each time I see an iteration of this, I honestly, I think it's getting better. But we need to make a decision soon. We cannot keep going. We've been doing this for 18 months. This committee's been active for 18 months now. It is time for us to make a decision. I'm really looking forward to parsing out line by line what we're doing here. But again, I have gone through and highlighted areas that I think are important, and especially the changes that have been made since the last iteration of this. And I think we may hear some possible minor tweaks to this tonight, which I am certainly willing to think about. But I can't see anything in the current draft ordinance before me that I would object to.
Thank you.
So.
Thank you. Commissioner Bell, are there particular areas you would like to focus in and have some conversation and consider a change in terms of what's here?
Can we please mute everybody?
Yeah, Lynn is, I think, yeah. Well, I think I can do that. It might mute me too. Let's see.
So you can turn yourself back on, maybe.
Yeah. I think commissioners, and just watching this, we do have folks that are unmuting themselves, so I think Lynn's in the back trying to keep them, so perhaps maybe,
Yeah, if
Madam
you
Chair.
are online, can you please remain muted? As you unmute yourself, it becomes very difficult for us to hear in the room. So if you're online, please remain muted. If you are unable to remain muted, you may be removed from the meeting because it is a disruption. So we ask you, please mute yourself if you are online, and please remain muted. We'll do our best to mute people rather than remove them, but should we have someone who continually unmutes, we will remove. Thank you so much for your help.
Okay. Well, I'd like to start by thanking the committee that's worked so hard on this, and Sarah and Dan. I'm really very grateful for the work that went into this, and I've heard in comments tonight, and also in some of the written comments, people who were unhappy because we're considering changing some of the committee's recommendations. And so I just want to address that for a second. It's not that we don't value your work, because we do. We value it very much. And there are, the more information we've taken in, largely from you, the more that the information you have provided us has guided our thinking, certainly mine. And so as I learn more from people, there are things that come up that I think, hey, wait a minute, why aren't we talking about this? And so I will raise a couple of those issues tonight. And I can just say that I can relate, because I was on the original TLT committee that advised the commissioners long before I was a commissioner. And we worked really, really hard on those projects, and then the commissioners would change our decisions, and we were annoyed by it. And so, I remember the conversations like, well, what do they even need us for? And so I get it, I get why you might be unhappy that we're not, that we're considering changing some of the recommendations. But please know that we are grateful for your work, and the majority of the things that are recommended, I really appreciate. It seems like we need to nail down the noise issue, whether or not we're gonna let go of daytime noise limitation requirement. And Sarah, I think, didn't we pull it out?
So you're referring to the noise language on page 13. So commissioners, I did leave the section F daytime noise language in. I was not sure if you wanted that removed. It was discussed, but I'm happy to receive direction to do that.
Okay.
Just didn't want to do something that perhaps I wasn't confident that that's what you wanted.
It's a great conversation for us to have. In terms of daytime noise, I would prefer it be removed. I feel that daytime noise is one that is very subjective. It's going to be very difficult for us to manage. I know sitting in my own home, listening to my neighbor's children play in the yard, I am able to hear that sitting on my deck. I'm able to hear it inside my house. I think that there's a standard there that is going to give us more difficulty than it's going to help. So that's my thought. Commissioner Val, you brought it up. Would you like to?
Well, I did bring it up, and I appreciate the conversation, but I think that it would be difficult to enforce, particularly because we don't have any similar standard countywide. And so, and also, I live on 5 acres, and I can hear some of my neighbors during the day. So I just don't think that it makes sense to do that at this time. So I would remove daytime noise also.
I can concur with that. We all have an expectation of a quiet time at night. We do. During the day, it's much more difficult to really look at and figure out how you do it, what is being overbearing during the day. I think that's something we can continue to look at, but I could concur that we need to remove the daytime noise limits from the current iteration of this ordinance 84.
Okay, so we're looking at the removal of daytime noise. While we're on noise, how about quiet hours and the language for quiet hours as amended?
I support that. 10 to 7 I think is perfectly reasonable to ask people to be quiet.
Okay.
I concur.
Okay. The other thing that's in there that we have heard some testimony about is the need to respond within 30 minutes when the STR complaint dispatch sends a message about received complaint. And that is specifically in the noise ordinance as well as in our other complaint section.
So I think we've always really kind of required that, a short time period as a response. This is the responsibility of a business like this. And I don't think it's an undue burden. Yes, people that live out of county, out of state, that own these short-term rentals, they need to be responsible. And yes, I understand they can't be responsible if they live in Utah or wherever. But that is why we do require that people have a local contact that is going to take responsibility for these types of infractions. And I'll just call it an infraction. And Dan or Bill, you may be upset with me by calling it that. But I think it needs to remain. Otherwise, and yes, are we going to meet that 30 minutes every time? No. But this is something that if we have multiple complaints where the owner of the STR, the short-term rental, is not responding in a quote-unquote reasonable time, and we have to pick a reasonable time. We do. We can't say 2 days. We can't say an hour. The 30 minutes or the 20 minutes has been in our regulation for some time now, and I don't see a reason to change that at this point.
Okay, thank you.
I do understand the concern about what if you're driving and you're out of cell range. Yeah, I don't own an STR. If I did, I would have somebody who would back me up if I was out of town or unable to take the calls. So I guess I have mixed feelings about 30 minutes, but also, and this is just a common sense response that maybe doesn't belong in the ordinance, but I would think that if something was annoying, you would call and file the complaint. Speaking of annoying, whoever is not muted online, please mute yourself, it's very distracting.
Commissioner Bell, everyone is muted as far as Lynn and I can tell. If there's someone in here that has a device that they are also using, please make sure all of your speakers are muted, because it could be feedback just from the owls. Yeah, well, it's because there's somebody that may, or dual devices or something where your speakers aren't off. There's something that's causing it.
Is it you, Commissioner?
Sarah's not muted.
Okay, all right. Well, what I was getting at was that if something is annoying, then I think it's appropriate to call the number. And if something is truly outrageous, it seems like it's appropriate to call 911. And I think that common sense would tell us which is which. Can you reduce the volume of the speaker? Maybe I'm wrong. No?
No, because
okay.
people can't hear.
Okay, so,
Yeah,
so I think I agree, the 30 minutes it's 30 minutes to respond, which means you can respond by phone. There is a space where on J, where it says that, it says that the contact person shall respond immediately to a phone complaint, must be able to arrive on site at the short-term rental within 30 minutes if a phone call is not sufficient. And I know we had some testimony about that as well. So responding, meaning you answer the phone, you reach out to your renters and try to resolve it that way, is one thing than actually having somebody show up on site. So I want to make sure, because we heard a fair amount of testimony from people that felt that was unreasonable, that both of those things are intended. A, that someone respond within 30 minutes, and B, that if a phone call doesn't do it, somebody will show up on site to solve the problem. And are we comfortable with both of those? So it would end up being 60 minutes potentially total between I called, couldn't get a hold of anybody at the rental, then I activated my on-call person, which could have been 60 minutes total. Yeah.
Okay.
From my perspective, you have the privilege of having a short-term rental. This is one of the things that goes with it. Is that what I heard so often from the short-term rental operators was, we don't need this because nobody ever causes a problem. Perfect. You don't need to worry about it because it doesn't happen at your short-term rentals. But for those short-term rentals where it is an issue, we do need to be responsive. We do now have the Granicus hotline, which gives everyone a place to call. Somebody asked for an online form. The Granicus also has an online form where people can file their complaint. So there's a good opportunity where people can get their information in, and that phone call will immediately go out to the contact person that has been designated by the short-term rental owner or operator. So you get to, set up who you have that can respond. Okay, so that all came off of noise, thank you. Other things that we heard comments about that we wanted to address. Sorry, without kicking everybody off, I don't know how to get rid of that.
I don't know.
Sarah, is it your mic?
Nope, I am muted except for the owl, so it's somebody else. If I mute, then nobody online hears.
Okay, other things, other concerns. We've had some conversations about parking. Are we comfortable with parking?
The current iteration of parking I am comfortable with.
Yes, I appreciate that Sarah followed up with Public Works Director Chris Laity, and Chris made the recommendation and agreed that if a short-term rental owner wants to talk to him about an exemption, that he would check it out and determine whether or not that the person could get by safely with less space. So I thought that was a good compromise.
Thank
Okay,
So I will delve into the more critical areas.
please do.
Transferability.
Yeah.
I think it's important that we somehow control transferability. These create kind of golden tickets. So I do understand that current short-term rental owners, they need some transferability. I don't think we can go in and eliminate that. So I think we have a plan for current short-term rental owners to be allowed one transfer. Short-term rental license can go with the home when they sell it. If you currently have a short-term rental, sell your home, the short-term rental license goes with the home. Once we adopt this regulation, then at that point, any new short-term rental owners, the license would not be transferable. I think this is a perfect way to get around it. What happens here is we get licensed because, well, that's our next conversation maybe, are the caps issues. But what happens is that we allow new licenses to be available to new homeowners. Again, a single time. If they own the home for a lifetime, now it's my understanding also that they can transfer it within the family.
So yes, so the transferability, the definitions of transfer and ownership, the committee worked very hard on.
Yep.
And there are exemptions for inheritance, change of marital status, and just to make sure I'm tracking Commissioner Yamamoto, if I've heard you correctly, the language as it's been written to allow one transfer of existing licensed properties and no transfer of any licenses issued following the date of adoption of these amendments, you support.
Right.
Okay,
I
thank
do.
you.
Because that way, someone that gets a new license after this ordinance is effect, they can own the home for 30 years, 50 years, pass it down to their kids, right? Am I correct there?
If they meet the exception for transfer, so if it's in an LLC,
Okay, yep.
Right.
We haven't gone there yet.
yes.
Yep,
So theoretically, there are some exceptions built in. I just don't know if they will capture all of those exceptions that you are thinking about, so perhaps we should look at those definitions too.
That might be a good thing. Savannah, I'm hoping you can look at that, Bill, look at that. To me, when you have if you're a new short-term rental licensee, then there should not be an expectation to transfer that license when you sell. Although we have to allow that for existing short-term permanent or license owners. So, my thoughts.
I agree with that, generally, maybe specifically. I think we had one guest tonight talk about, I think it was Meadow Davis, talk about how her perception that Manzanita has clear, reasonable regulations, including license relinquishment at point of sale. And I think that's, if we're going to allow one license transfer for people who currently have a short-term rental, because that was their expectation when they got it, I could live with that, but I think we should eliminate license transfers at point of sale for new and future short-term rental owners because it locks up the system, and we want people to be able to, using Manzanita as an example, they have a wait list, people leave the wait list, somebody else comes on, and if the license was attached to the house in perpetuity, then you're not gonna have that, it's not fair and equitable. And also, the way that it works currently, when a license is attached to a house in perpetuity, it has inflated the value of real estate here, which for some people is a benefit, but for other people is a real serious drawback. And we heard people talk about how the property values here are inflated by STRs to the extent that people can't, local people can't buy houses. So that's absolutely true. Young people can't buy houses. You know, there are, people can't find houses to rent. All of these things are impacted by STRs. So I agree with one transfer for current owners.
Thank you.
So, yeah, and I agree. I think this was one the committee spent a lot of time with, trying to find a way to create fluidity in our market so that people would have a chance to come into the short-term rental operating market throughout the life, that we wouldn't have just a current set of them were always what we had, but rather there would be some fluidity. And felt that, as has been stated, that transfer, basically at point of sale, it doesn't go with, it provides some of that fluidity. There was, however, a strong desire to ensure that inheritance was an opportunity, so that people who had a family, beach home forever, that the transfer from parent to child, or in the event of a divorce from, husband and wife, that sort of change, that those were not going to kick people out of their family homes. And I think that we've captured that in the language. It was definitely an interesting challenge to look at all of the legalities of that. What is a transfer and how does that work? So I think we've captured what the committee was hoping for, and I'm hearing from my fellow commissioners that one transfer is acceptable. Anything, Sarah and Dan, that you want to comment on based on our conversation?
No.
Good?
Got it.
Okay. Okay,
Let's move on to another one.
next point of conversation.
Talk about caps.
Okay?
Somewhere we are going to need to have caps. We cannot continue to let this go forever. Otherwise, our beach communities are going to be nothing but short-term rentals. And that to me is a problem. At the same time, we understand that people, it's basic to our economy, and it provides value for homeowners. And we've had this conversation in the very beginning. I think Commissioner Bell, you brought it up. We are not stopping, we are not eliminating short-term rentals in this county. Absolutely not, far from it. But the livability issues are getting extreme in this county, and we need to resolve those. So somehow we need to develop caps. At the same time, I'm going to bring up something that it's related to caps, and I don't know how we get there. We have a large number of short-term rental license holders that do not rent their homes. I'm not sure that's a bad thing. We've heard people in the room, I think at the last meeting, state that, well, that keeps renters out of our neighborhood when our neighbors have a license and they don't rent their home. But is that taking away an opportunity from someone that really could have the license? And this sort of fits in with the cap idea at the same time. So I don't know how we do this, but I think it may take a while if we try to find some kind of a use it or lose it system. And I think that may take time to work its way through the system if we develop something like that. But at the same time, I think we do need caps, and I'm not sure we can wait for a use it or lose it system to be developed. I think that's kind of a longer term conversation perhaps. It depends on how my fellow commissioners think about that. But at the same time, we need to start limiting. And I know, Sarah, you have a plan in place. Once this ordinance goes into effect, you're going to start working with the unincorporated communities and have conversations with the unincorporated communities to see exactly where. And please, you can't, once Sarah starts the process of having conversations with unincorporated communities, if you want to lower the number of short-term rentals in your community, just be aware that this isn't going to happen overnight. It could take years to get down to a level that the community members feel they want their community to be at. But we need to start somewhere, and I think this is a good place to start. I have to throw in another issue here.
Shall we tease that one apart before you complicate it? I would like to tease that one apart before you complicate it. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
So I think that as we start talking about caps, one of the pieces is there are, I think, 250 licenses currently issued out of the 1,200 total that are not being used. So there's really 1,000 licenses or just under 1,000 active licenses in our communities. So when we take a look and say, well, do we want to put a cap on it, knowing that we have an economic side that we cannot afford to damage. And I think that's what I want to tease out of this, is that we as a community we originally brought TLT in because it helps pay for our roads in Tillamook County. We cannot afford to lose short-term rentals in our community, A, as a government because of what it funds, B, as an economy because of what it funds. So we have to, as commissioners, mind that balance as well when we start talking about caps. When we start talking about would there be a use it or lose it provision, that would be a way to take inactive short-term rentals and say, you need to be active because we need the money that you provide for our roads and for our economy. But the way that we'd like to balance that so we don't have an explosion of short-term rentals potentially would to be putting in a cap and activating the ones that are underneath there that are not active. So we have this balance that we have to look at, talk about, numbers we have to run, because as we do want to work with communities to determine where they would like their number to be, there is still a hard, fast economic need in the county that we can't let communities drop so far down that we lose what we have to have in our economy. So this is a very delicate balance. Use it or lose it with caps, they're very interconnected. Commissioner Bell, do you have comments about that before we let Commissioner Yamamoto further complicate it?
Well,
I'm going to take a little snack from it.
I agree that it's complicated and that this is the balance we're looking for. We've heard from so many people, a lot of you tonight and previously and in 1,500 emails that, I mean literally 1,500
yeah, literally.
That the quality of life is degraded in certain neighborhoods because of short-term rentals. And I believe that's absolutely true. People are losing their neighbors, they're losing the people that they volunteer with, the people that they socialize with, the people who they help, or people who help them, or the people they gather and celebrate things with. We're losing our sense of cohesive neighborhoods, our ability to help each other age in place, for example. We're losing our sense of place. And so that's not true everywhere. It's probably not true at Quanda Shores. I think we heard clearly that Quanda Shores is a full-time short-term rental neighborhood and people who live there like it that way. And so I think there are neighborhoods like that where the intent of the neighborhood was to be a short-term rental neighborhood and it should stay that way. There are other neighborhoods that have been irreparably changed by short-term rentals. And we value the income. We do. The county values the income and we value business and the economy. And that matters. It matters. It matters that people buy a second house here and use short-term rentals in order to pay their mortgage or their taxes and invest in paying off that house so they can retire here and become part of our community. All of that matters. And I have friends who have short-term rentals and they supplement their retirement income. That matters. And so we're, nobody wants to eliminate short-term rentals. We certainly don't want to eliminate the revenue from short-term rentals. We don't want to eliminate your economic benefit from short-term rentals. And we do want to protect neighborhoods. And to the extent that, we're late. We've heard from Neoconi clearly tonight that we are late to this discussion. That there's already been tremendous changes in Neoconi, and how will we roll that back? I don't know that we can roll that back, but we can try. We can start, and we can slow down growth in certain neighborhoods. And what I think it'll really take is for Sarah to work with each neighborhood to come up with their own plan. But we couldn't do that. That could take several years. So we couldn't start with that. So we're starting with this, and after we decide whatever we decide on this amendment, Sarah is going to work with each neighborhood in succession to help you come up with your own neighborhood plan. And I think that there are some things that need to be available, some tools that need to be available that aren't yet in this draft. I think caps need to be available to neighborhoods, and different neighborhoods will choose different caps appropriately. I think that, I know some people want to talk about distance and density, and like my fellow commissioner. And I think I want to talk about limiting ownership. You know, here's something. It seems to me like I don't guarantee that I read all 1,500 emails, but I read over 1,000. And there are a number of themes that came together, and one of the very clear themes several of you here tonight have talked about, and that's that what really changed was you're not arguing, most of you are not arguing about single family, locally owned, mom and pop STRs. Those are not the problems. The problems are the big corporate STRs that are owned by people who live someplace else, who are never going to live here, who may never even have visited here, and they bought these places, they bought big places, or they built big places here in order to run them as mini hotels or whatever. You know, it's strictly commercial business in a residential neighborhood. So my question was, if we eliminated those, how would that take care of what percentage of the problem? So we can't eliminate them entirely, but there are things we could do, like we could limit ownership. Some of you have said this here tonight. If people can own one short-term rental, that makes sense. If you're a corporation, you might own 5 or 7. But if people can own one, that seems fair and reasonable and appropriate. I polled some of my neighbors. How many short-term rentals do you need to own? They said 1. So that's a possibility. I think I suggested, what if there was no corporate ownership, and then that was rejected because apparently some families put their short-term rentals in an LLC so that it can be shared in the family and the next generation can inherit it, which I certainly wouldn't want to mess with that. But I think we have to find the solution to not having our neighborhoods overrun by boutique hotels. So I think we have work to do on that. We're not going to be able to make this decision tonight. I'm telling you this right now. But I think I would like to hear, the next time we meet, I'd like to hear more from Sarah and Dan about use it or lose it. It seems like if we had use it or lose it and caps at the same time, that would make sense, because we have people holding short-term rental licenses because it's about property values. They're not using them. They're not using them as short-term rentals. It increases their property values. Well, you know, that's not why we even have a program like this, is not for people to buy a license and just hold it to increase their property values. So if people aren't transferring their permits and we're going to have a list, then we want the list to be active. We want, as people leave it, other people to be able to come on. So it doesn't make sense for people to just hold permits, like we've heard the phrase the golden ticket, to just be able to hold a permit so that when they sell their house, it'll be worth a lot more than their neighbor's house. So I do support a use it or lose it approach in combination with a caps approach. And I agree with Commissioner Scar that we don't want to do something that dramatically reduces the amount of short-term rentals across the county, although there are certain neighborhoods that would like us to dramatically reduce short-term rentals. But I looked at the idea of distance and density. I looked at maps that showed, like, if we applied distance and density, I would need more information about that in neighborhoods, because if you applied it in certain neighborhoods where the lots are small and close together, it would really eliminate short-term rentals in that neighborhood. So I don't think we have enough information to know how to make that work in dense neighborhoods, but I'd like more information on it. Okay. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. No, I think those are all very good points.
I want, before I go on, I want to make one point. Short-term, TLTs, transient lodging tax revenue. Understand that the commissioners have decided a long time ago that 30% of the transient lodging taxes come into the county, that the county can do anything we want with. That goes to public works to help maintain our roads. This year was $1.6 million that went to roads from our transient lodging tax. Unfortunately, when you look at that $1.6 million, that's a third of the public works budget. It's just so sad. It is. But that's an important aspect that we need to talk about. So the last thing I wanted to bring up before we really dive into caps, Commissioner Bell, I think, brought this up again, limiting ownership. We currently have quite a few people that own multiple short-term rentals in this county. No matter what we do with limiting ownership, I think we do have to grandfather in the current short-term rental owners, even if they own 4, 5, 6, 8, I don't know. Open to discussion, of course. But I don't think we can really limit that. The question is, going forward, do we want to limit the number of short-term rentals that can be owned to new short-term rental license owners? I'm torn here, I really am. I just don't know. The basic reason that I want to allow short-term rentals is, again, because of the mom and pops. They're doing something, they're building wealth within their family with a single home that they own. And I'm sure they're using that home quite often at the same time. People that own multiple short-term rentals, 4, 5, 6 short-term rentals, are they utilizing their homes? I don't think so. And I'm not even sure they live here, and if they do, that's great. But I'll bet you that they don't rent out the home that they truly live in. So it's tough, it really is.
It's tough, and so in the committee, we heard about a number of people who owned 2 or 3, and that was their retirement. That was how they funded themselves. So there is this potential unintended consequence of damaging some of our people who live here full-time, who have actually made this how they survive, right? It is their business. So it is a challenging piece for us to look at that way. Mr. Kearns did present to the committee a way, if you have ones that you don't want to have forever, that from a sort of legal perspective, I think it was 5 years, you give them a notice that after 5 years, they will not be able to own more than one. So that is not something that's impossible. It certainly comes with risk. One of the conversations that Mr. Kearns had with the committee was anytime you look at reducing short-term rental numbers, meaning having people who currently have one getting kicked out of the system, there's a lot more risk in that for us as a county. So I want to surface that because it was a good portion of conversation in the committee, and the committee really felt like, eesh, that's a challenge both in terms of risk and in terms of people who do live here full-time, who do have this as a business as well. And that was one of the challenges we had in trying to, how do you untangle that true corporate nature and that true business nature? So I appreciate the conversation, and I hope that a magic bullet can be found between now and our next meeting, but I will say that the committee did have a fair amount of conversation related to this and did ask both Mr. Kearns and Sarah to try to find a way to, tweak that. So let's hope we can find a way between now and then.
So my proposal on that is that people who currently have multiple short-term rentals keep them until they get ready to sell them, and that we heard from Mr. Peterson in our first hearing that he has 3 short-term rentals, and I have 0% of me would want to reduce Mr. Peterson's short-term rentals. So I don't think it would be fair or reasonable, but what I do think is reasonable is people who don't currently own have a short-term rental, for us to tell them up front, this is the new rule, you can have 1. I think that's perfectly fair.
One other issue that I want to bring up before we go to caps. There is this issue, and this is an important issue, of people that had a building permit to build a home prior to our institution of a pause on short-term rental licenses.
So David, we will be dealing with that. We'll be talking about that tomorrow at our regular meeting around lifting the pause, because it is not in the ordinance language. It will specifically be in the board order, which lifts the pause. So what I would love for us to do is acknowledge that we are aware of that issue and that we are looking for a solution to that issue. And that will be part of lifting the pause, but not part of ordinance language, because this is a one-time issue that we're sitting in and it won't go forward in the ordinance. So we have 5 minutes left. I would love to hold that one for tomorrow if I can convince you.
Yep, that's fine. So shall we finish our discussion on caps?
Let's go back to caps.
So, yeah, I understand we need to place caps on short-term rentals. I think currently the best way to do it, and this is just me talking, currently the best way to do it is to take the current number of short-term rentals we have in each community, maybe increase it by 1%. But then we need to start looking at those that have already had a permit to build their home, but so it's always going to get kind of convoluted moving forward. But I think that will allow for us to start the movement of short-term rental licenses again, so that we're not stuck at a certain level and we're not issuing any new short-term rental licenses. I think we need to get there. I know there are going to be some communities that, to me, the density limit or the number of short-term rentals is going to be too high. But again, I think we can fix that, but we cannot fix it immediately. This is going to take some time for us to adjust short-term rental caps downwards slowly, if indeed that's what a community wants to do. But as Commissioner Bell stated, there are certain beachfront neighborhoods that kind of the expectation is for that neighborhood to be a short-term rental haven. So I think we have ways that we could possibly adjust those numbers as we move forward at the same time.
So can I, point of clarification, so we've talked about a number of things that are not in the ordinance. So caps we've put in here as to be set by board order, which keeps the tool in the ordinance, but the actual implementation of the tool, we will also talk about tomorrow at our commissioner meeting in terms of numbers and that sort of thing. But it's in the ordinance so that we can use that tool, should we choose to. Certainly the board could set the cap at 100%, or at 100%. We could we could not set it as a lower number. I don't think that would happen. But the tool itself needs to be in here. If we're looking at one per owner, trying to limit corporate ownership, use it or lose it, all of things which have been brought up in this conversation, do those need to be in the ordinance in some form as a tool with a reference to being enacted by a board order, similar to caps? Is that what I'm saying makes sense?
Oh, kind of put a placeholder?
Because caps right now are in there as a placeholder. This ordinance does not establish a cap level. It refers to a board order's ability to establish a cap level. So let's take use it or lose it. Would we put that in there as a tool and refer to the board's ability to activate that with a board order?
My feeling is if you want to implement a use it or lose it requirement, it should be in an ordinance. If you're not ready to do that, then don't put it in yet. Also on the caps, even though they're referenced here, one thing I would ask you consider is I think they've talked about 14 rural unincorporated communities. Have those defined, the boundaries defined. So I would recommend you attach one or more maps as exhibits to this ordinance that define those rural areas. And then that plus the reference already gives you the tools going in the future to set those, and everyone knows, am I in or out of a capped area? I don't really know. Well, here, exhibit shows you in or out.
Okay. So when I bring that up, because it's 7:58, and I promise to try to get us out of here as close to 8 as possible. So Sarah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So what Mr. Kearns is referring to, those maps are very easy for us to generate. You have examples of those in your hearing packet from the previous hearing. So what I believe we are hearing is that perhaps you would like us to come back So we would need to put this perhaps in another updated draft ordinance, language that you could consider should you want to implement a use it or lose it clause with during this time, limitation of ownership, and then with that, the cap, and as Mr. Kern suggested, we had talked today about including a couple of additional definitions, one being defining unincorporated communities, which ones those are, with the exhibit of the maps. So we are happy to come back when you would like to meet again and bring language for you to consider, and also post it 7 days prior to a hearing so that the public also has an opportunity to look at that before we come back to the table.
That'd be great. I'd also like to talk about distance and density, if maybe in general, and certainly in unincorporated Tillamook County, because I realize it's 8 o'clock, but I'll just say this in 30 seconds.
No, that's fine.
Because there's evidence in our neighboring counties that as short-term rentals became more limited, they've moved inland, they've moved into the east and taken up riverfronts, they've taken up rural properties. So those are the places where locals usually live. And so I want us to talk about that, to talk about, do we want the Kilchis River and the Trask River and the Wilson River, et cetera, to be taken up with short-term rentals, or do we want to look at some kind of distance and density?
Thank you, Commissioner Bell. So to just make sure I have it straight in my head, the areas that you're referring to are outside of the UGBs and outside of the unincorporated communities, specifically along those other rural areas that you were just referring to.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, and I support that. I really think one of the things that we've heard is we didn't get ahead of this in the last sort of iteration, and let's not let that happen again. And as a number of people pointed out, what happens in our neighboring communities, and in this case, in our own communities, should we cap them and not cap our non-communities, it will push them out to that area. They just did their first poll of licenses in Lincoln County from their wait list, and they have sub-cap areas, and the areas where their sub-cap wasn't yet full were the unincorporated, very rural inland areas, and those were snapped up just like that. So I just want us to be aware and thoughtful about what we're creating. Yeah.
Commissioner Scar, the other thing that Mr. Kearns that I were discussing today that has not come up yet also, but given we are approaching the end of these hearing proceedings, would you like to see language from us for compliance of existing licensed rentals for things like parking, maximum occupancy, etc.? So would you like us to propose a couple of timelines for your consideration? You know, obviously things like if we want to exclude, like the transfer piece. So existing STRs would be allowed one transfer. So those pieces would not be relevant to a compliance timeline. But if the intent is to have everyone eventually conform to the new parking requirements based on the number of no longer sleeping areas but bedrooms or some of the other pieces, we are happy to put together a couple of schedules for you to consider at the next hearing.
I think that would be very helpful.
Thank you.
Please do.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I think what we're doing is we're going to continue the public hearing process.
So I think that we will schedule an additional public hearing because we are making substantive changes to the ordinance. So we had a first reading of the ordinance and a second reading of the ordinance that was the same essential ordinance. At this time, because we are making substantive changes, we will need to have a third reading of the ordinance.
I would believe so.
So we will have a third reading of the ordinance, which would incorporate the things that we have asked for. And at that time, I would like to take public comment, but I would like folks to remember the meeting today and the meeting last time and encourage written public comment, because I'm going to suggest that at the next hearing, we will take a very limited amount of public comment so that we have time, with any luck at all, to chew through all of the new stuff that they have given us and know if we need another hearing or where we need to go with that. So I'm really going to encourage written public comment. I'm also going to encourage written public comment not the day of the hearing, just because if you really,
we got today.
We got this today.
when we came in, so there's no way we could have read it before we
So-
started this meeting.
Some of these were trickling through the weekend and I was able to read them. But if you wait until the day of the hearing to submit your public testimony written, it is very difficult for us to have a chance to digest it. And if we only listen to public testimony, it is very difficult for us to actually move this process forward. I hope that for all of you who are listening and sitting here with us, listening to us talk was useful to you as you sort of understood how we are digesting the ordinance and trying to find our path forward. I do hope you will comment on what you've heard from us tonight as well, so we know if we're on the mark or where we are.
And in case anybody doesn't know, because of open meeting law, public meeting law, the three of us cannot discuss this outside of a public meeting. So we can't talk about this in our office. We can't talk about it in the hallway. We can only talk about it in a public meeting with you, which is why we didn't take all of your comments. It's why we have to talk in this meeting. This is the only place we can talk about this.
Right. Okay, so I think we're gonna wrap this up. I do wanna restate that we will be talking about the conditions of lifting the pause. It's tomorrow at our commissioner meeting at 9 a.m. It's not the first thing on the agenda, it's a little further down, but you can listen to that meeting remotely. We are encouraging remote because our commissioner meeting room is about the size of half of this room in width and maybe 2/3 of it in depth. So we do not have a lot of chairs in there. We are only talking about it tomorrow. No decisions will be made. It is just on the agenda solely for discussion. What we've talked about tonight will undoubtedly play into what discussion we have there. But I know that there are many people for whom that is equally interesting as what we're doing in the ordinance. So we invite you, and there is a link on the community development webpage. There's
Tomorrow morning.
a one-time link that we posted tomorrow morning so that you can link into the meeting if you'd like.
So, Madam Chair, I want to be cognizant of time,
Yep.
but to keep the process moving forward,
Yes.
I did ask staff to reach out to the port. In our standard practice in the department, we have a lot of public hearings. We always have an extra date or two because even in land use proceedings, this happens regularly. If you would like to set a date and time certain tonight, that would help with the public. It would remove the need to go through an entire public notification process again. It is our understanding that July 6th, which is a Thursday at 5:30, is a viable date. My review of calendar availability and confirming with the board secretary, it sounds like that may be a viable date for the three of you, Mr. Sargent, Mr. Kearns. I believe, Mr. Kearns, we should be able to get this done, our work, in the next week or two. Would
Yep.
you agree with that? So if you are available to meet July 6th, we could continue this hearing to that date here at 5:30.
Okay.
The room is also available.
I am available.
Yes.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
So perhaps then if you want to confirm that as the next hearing date, we can get that on record tonight.
Yeah, so I would like to confirm that the next hearing date for the ordinance 84 reading number 3 will be July the 6th here at 5:30.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I don't know if you have to make a motion on that?
Do we need a motion?
No, okay.
No.
Just confirmation.
So just to confirm all of the new stuff we've talked about tonight will be written into an updated ordinance revision draft, which will be posted so people have a chance to review it before the next meeting.
Yes.
It'll be posted how many days before the next
At
meeting?
least 7.
Okay.
That's just our standard practice in the office. We try to do that with anything. And what you will see down at the bottom right-hand corner is the June 13th date stricken with the updated date. So for those that have multiple drafts, as we do, as we've gone through this process, you'll know you have the right drafts. We'll have the next date on it, and we will include that language in italics, so it will be easier to find, and we can bold it because, this is already a pretty hefty document. We want people to be able to see what happened tonight easily and clearly in the draft.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you all for hanging in there with us.
Thank you so much for all of your participation. We will officially adjourn this meeting at 8:09 p.m.